I just want to feel the physical pain of the exertion of doing this. Because maybe if I start feeling it in my body, I won't feel this excruciating emotional pain that I was in. And of course that didn't happen. I ended up having both types of pain at once. My children looking at me and saying, well, what are we going to do now? They think I know what I'm doing, and I don't know what we're going to do now. If you don't laugh, you'll cry, although I usually do both. We felt like we were stumbling around and didn't know what we were doing, and it was dark and scary, and yet there would be these moments where everything would just light up. I often think, what if Jeff hadn't died? Where would we all be? And what sort of a person would I be?
My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Emma, you were widowed at 42, and less than 3 weeks later, you did the City to Surf, one of the world's biggest fun runs, with your family. What was actually going through your head that day?
Yes, that was a fun run in Sydney, Australia, and we had already booked in to do the run before my husband passed away. And of course, my first thought was, well, we're not going to go to Sydney and do that. It was the middle of winter here, and we'd been through the funeral and all of those difficult first few weeks. And suddenly I thought, well, what else are we going to do? We may as well we've got the accommodation booked. We may as well just get out of here and have a change of scene at the very least. So we went to Sydney and we joined just thousands and thousands of other people. And we didn't run, we just walked together as a family. And what I noticed, well, two things. One thing I noticed were just the number of other family groups and families and friends that seemed to be doing the same thing as us, which was doing an event, a fun run, raising money for various different causes, clearly going through different things. You can tell sometimes by what's written on their T-shirts. You know, you walk along behind people and you can see that they're walking on behalf of someone or with someone who needs help. And so there was this real sense of connection between all of us, all of these strangers. But also I remember thinking, I just want to feel the physical pain of the exertion of doing this. Because maybe if I start feeling it in my body, I won't feel this excruciating emotional pain that I was in. And of course that didn't happen. I ended up having both types of pain at once. But it was this real sense of needing to just mark what had happened to us and be in a different place. I remember it was very difficult coming home from that experience because it was the first time I'd come back from a trip to an empty house that was cold and the lights were off. And it was really, I still, a decade later, can remember how hard that was. But I'm so glad that we did it as a family. And it taught me that it was really healthy for us just to get out of the house and go somewhere different and look at something different. It wasn't going to solve the grief or make it any easier, but it certainly was a healthy thing to be out in the sunshine on a beach.
You have said that The Last Love Note was never supposed to feel like a grief novel. You wanted it to feel more like a Richard Curtis film. When you are sitting inside real loss, how do you make yourself right towards hope instead of staying in the dark?
That's such a wonderful question. And I feel like the answer is that it reflects real life. We are never 100% happy and we're never 100% sad. I think we oscillate between so many different emotions, even on one day. And also in the midst of even the deepest loss, you can still find some humor and some hope. There's often a lot of laughter even after a funeral when people are in the room together talking about their happy memories of a person. And I think that humanity seems to come through even in our darkest times. But I also had this experience straight after the funeral where I came in and again, it was freezing cold and I came into the cold house and there were just flowers everywhere in the house that people had sent us. And I remember my children looking at me and saying, well, what are we going to do now? And it was this real moment where I thought, they think I know what I'm doing, and I don't know what we're going to do now. This is terrifying, us going into the rest of our lives without him. But for some reason, I glanced at these flowers and I came up with this idea in the instant. And I said, tomorrow we're going to have our closest family and friends over, and we're going to pull apart all these flowers, and we're going to put them into different bunches, and we're going to get in the car and go and deliver them to a hospital and just take them in and give them to random patients on the ward. And that became this beautiful moment of focusing on something helpful and something purposeful, even on this very dark day for us. And so then when we realized how that felt, we thought, well, we'll just start looking for one tiny little life-affirming thing every single day, even if it doesn't solve what we're facing. And so then, of course, every day it would be things like, somebody let us in the queue in traffic, and I'd think, well, that's nice. That's someone being nice. And so that was it. That's all I had to notice for that whole day. And of course, those things started to build up, and it then became this knowledge that alongside loss and any challenges that we're facing is often hope and kindness. And so it really helped me to get through.
What was it like that first time you were in the hospital giving the flowers to random people? Did people think you were crazy, or would they appreciate it?
Well, we spoke to the nurses behind the desk in one of the wards, and they were really touched by it. It was this unexpected moment at their end, and every time I visited a hospital since then, in the decade since, I've thought about that and just the simple ways that we can make a difference for people. I've experienced so much kindness and compassion from other people. It was just nice to be able to pay it forward. And I think that was a real lesson too, learning that we don't have to pay back all of the kindness that we receive, but we can find ways to pay it forward as we go through.
Yeah, I love that perspective too, just looking for the good things. I wish
Yeah.
I could do that. I try to do it and it lasts for like 6 minutes and then I stop.
Yeah, it's hard. It's actually hard, the gratitude, looking for gratitude, because at the you are it, I think there's a risk of it becoming toxic positivity, and we don't want that. I don't think that's at all helpful for us to think, well, make the most of every moment. I don't think it's possible. And I think that this was a way of just looking for a tiny little thing, and that was enough.
Before grief reshaped your work, you wrote for your daughter. You wrote Unrequited originally to get her to pick up a book. Did it work? And what did it feel like when she finally read it?
Yes, that was when my daughter was 14. She's now 25, and she hated reading, but she loved Harry Styles. And so I thought, well, I'll just write, and why don't I just write a little story for her to show her that reading can be fun? So I wrote a book about a boy band, and it was actually one of the most beautiful memories of my parenting life, because she and I used to go for walks at night and talk about the plot and the ideas. And then in the end, a high school friend of mine, Sally Whitwell, who's a composer here in Australia, asked me if we could co-write a musical based on that book. And we did that. And we ended up staging that at my daughter's high school. And she ended up being the stage manager. So it sort of got completely out of control in a great way. And in fact, that we put on that show in the year following Jeff's death. And I remember thinking, oh, we'd already been planning it, so it was already in train. And I thought, this doesn't seem like the kind of thing you do when you're in the midst of grief. Stage as the glittering high school musical with, glitter cannons and disco balls and all of that. But at the end of the day, it was actually the most therapeutic thing I could have done, because I was just surrounded by theatre kids who were just so exuberant and happy and, just joyous, and music, and just being able to escape into another world. So it ended up being this really magical experience, and another example of doing something that's never going to fix how you're feeling, but it's also not going to hurt, and it actually may give you something uplifting in some of the darkest times.
I just had so many memories when my dad first got asked to write kids' books. I see him smiling because he's thinking the same thing. When he would write a chapter and then he would read it to me and my younger sister. My older siblings were, I think they were too old at that point for like middle grade novels. We were like the sweet spot of age. And he would read us a chapter and he'd be like, which parts were your favorite? Which parts felt boring? Which parts felt, and then we'd give feedback. And then the next time he'd read that chapter and then like the next chapter. And it was like, it was so fun.
Oh, I love that so much. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it sounds like a similar thing. Is your daughter a reader now, or did she was she a one and done with that book?
I mean, I wish I could say she's a big reader. Her sister is, but she always was. She does love she did love the whole experience, and she's very supportive of my career. So she does read my books, which is better than nothing. And she has started reading in the last couple of years a little bit more, which is encouraging.
I'm in the same boat. My sister loves to read, and I read my dad's stuff, and then I just started reading the last few years again a lot. But
Yeah. I think the way that life has gone with social media and just all the distractions that we have, it's actually challenging for all of us to focus and concentrate for longer periods of time. And I know when I wrote that book for her that I was very conscious of that. And I did things like I had short chapters and I had cliffhanger endings and a lot of plot and dialogue and not too much narrative description because I was consciously writing for somebody who didn't like reading. And I feel like I've tried to keep some of that pace in my adult novels now so that because I think we're all in a situation where it can be more challenging than it used to be in our busy lives to concentrate.
yeah, I agree. And it's funny again, not to keep bringing it back, but my dad, that was his thing. He said we need short chapters. We always need cliffhangers at the end of every chapter.
That's right. That's good. We're on the same page.
Yeah, yeah. You guys talked before we hit record. He must have pre-planned this out.
What is the thing about losing Jeff that you have still not figured out how to put into words?
Wow, that's a good question as well. Do you know, the thing that endures that I continue to find really hard is the parenting side of it with my son, who was 5 years old when Jeff died and is now 15. So he's now 6'3" and towering over me. And, you know, he's just in the middle of high school. And it's that I mean, I always get the high school comparisons wrong when I'm talking to people in the US because we have different names. Anyway, he's 15, so you can imagine. Um, and I think, you know, with a child, you just sort of continually learn what he's lost. He's lost so much more really than I have. And I think children continue to grieve in different ways the older they get and the more they realize about what's missing in their lives that they can never get back. And so I think that has been, for me, the hardest part of the grief and the hardest thing to explain as well.
During those 10 years in the Australian public service, when writing had to fit into the margins of work and family, what kept the dream alive?
I was dreaming through that whole decade of writing. I do remember times when I would just be sitting there trying to focus on my work and thinking of stories. And I would want to race home from work every night and sit down and write, and sometimes I'd be just too tired to do it. And so there was a lot of squeezing the writing in around the rest of life. And of course, my kids were younger then too, so that was hard. And I think when you've just got a burning ambition to do something, you just find the time for it and you squeeze it into the nooks and crannies of the day because you don't have the luxury of thinking, I've got a whole week ahead of me that I could write my book. So I was very much dreaming of this, and I never imagined that I would ever reach a point where it was possible to be a full-time author. And really, it has only been possible since my books were published in the US. And that's only been for the last couple of years. I've been juggling multiple jobs all these years and for 10 years as a single parent too. So it's been, you really want to write to make it happen because it's never straightforward or easy. And I think when it's a dream, then it draws you to it rather than you feeling like you're sort of having to sit down and do it in a laborious kind of way. So I feel very, very lucky that I'm now at the stage where I can focus on it in a full-time way.
I was going to ask you if you still have that that kind of, I don't know, spark or that magic where you're when you were at work and think like, oh my gosh, I got to race home to get this idea down. Do you still feel that same joy and passion when you're writing now?
I do when I get into writing the story, but there are aspects of it that now do feel more like a job, which is has to happen. There's a lot of things like the having to keep up with social media, and there's a lot of aspects of being a writer that it don't come naturally to a lot of writers. Like the definitely, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I'm quite introverted, so having to get up on stage and talk about writing has been something that didn't come naturally to me at first, and I've spent a lot of years getting used to that, and I love it now. But gosh, that was challenging, and so I think there's a lot of parts of any job that are sort of less glamorous than some of the others. I'm very lucky to have just come home from a book tour in the US and Canada, and also touring around a bit in Australia. But now I'm so tired from that. I'm really glad to be back home and in my own house and just sort of doing a little bit of work in the garden and that sort of thing, just to sort of retreat and rebuild my energy again.
Writing was one long pursuit. The aurora became another. You chased the aurora australis for 7 years before you finally caught it on camera. What kept you going back after every miss?
I think I must be just a very resilient person in the face of failure. I had this dream of capturing the aurora, and I hadn't realised that you could do this from my hometown, from just sort of outside my hometown, and that if you went into the dark into the national park there, it was possible to capture it. But at the time, I didn't understand really the science of it. I wasn't a good photographer at that point. I didn't understand how to work the camera properly. Sometimes I'd go out there in the middle of the dark and the middle of the night, and I'd get spooked by a noise, and I'd think, oh, I can't do this. And I'd rush back home. And I just kept going back. It's the same with getting published, really. You have to learn that if anything worth pursuing, you're likely to face a lot of rejection and failure. And so I just kept this dream alive. And I will never forget the first time I captured it, that I was just standing in the middle of the night in the dark. My son was with me. Not that he was a child. I don't know what I expected he could do if something went wrong. But I had the camera there, and before I even took the photo, I could see the glow of the colors in the viewfinder of the camera. And I just cried. I just thought, I can't believe I'm finally seeing this. And it was, I guess, sort of a beautiful parallel to what was going on in my life, in that we felt like we were stumbling around and didn't know what we were doing, and it was dark and scary and all of that. And yet there would be these moments where everything would just light up. And I just clung to those, and I still cling to them. And to this day, years later, having now seen the aurora multiple times, I will still rush out whenever there's, news online that it's happening again, because it's just sort of a reminder of how beautiful it can be and how unexpected it can be if you make the effort of looking up. And I think that's sort of been my lesson.
Start at the End is built around one moment that changes everything, one turning point that throws the whole story in a different direction. Was there a real moment in your own life like that where you can see the exact fork in the road?
I feel like we all have a lot of those moments in our lives, and I can look back and think, and in fact, working on this book and then talking to readers, often readers will say they read the book and then they'll tell me all of their moments in life where they encountered this fork in the road or a crossroads, where if they hadn't made this decision and they'd made a different one, it would have gone in this entirely different direction. And sometimes those things happen to us and it's beyond our control. And other times we make a choice that sends us down a certain path. It might be, a relationship choice, or it could be a what we study at university, or it could be a job that we take, a decision we make to go and live in a different city or country. And we can sometimes glance over and look at the life we had before and think, oh, did I make the right decision, or am I doing the right thing here? And so for me, obviously, the main moment for me was losing Jeff. And I used to wonder every so often, what would have happened if this had been the other way around, and if it had been me who had died? What would the impact have been on my children? Where would they be living? We wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation together today, because I wouldn't have written these books, and everything would have been different. And I think when I wrote the book, I wanted to convince myself that it would have been okay in either universe. If it had been me, he would have found a way through this, and my children would still be okay. And I think that was what I was trying to tell myself, that even if life doesn't work out the way that we expected, it can still be, we can find our way through it in a way that can still be worthwhile and quite beautiful in places. And it's been such a long, difficult lesson to learn. My 10 years ago self would have heard me say this and thought, well, that's very optimistic, but I can't get through the next hour, that kind of feeling, because it was all new and I was in shock. So it's been a very gradual lesson to learn, but I feel like that's where this book has come from. And being able to have it published in the year that's the 10th anniversary of losing Jeff has been extra special.
That fork in the road led you into harder territory. Frasier, in Start at the End, is dealing with depression and addiction. That is a harder thing to put inside a love story than grief is. What made you decide to go there?
I think it was the mother in me that wrote that storyline, because I worry that there's not enough examples in fiction of strong male characters that are dealing with mental health difficulties. And as the mother of a son who doesn't have a dad, I want him to be able to see that kind of a character who's facing this and facing it openly and facing it with the help of people around him, and finding his way through. I think that fiction can be really helpful for us sometimes to be able to explore something that we're dealing with in our own lives, but it's not us, it's a character, and we can let our imaginations inhabit their world and see them find their way through. And so I think fiction can be really therapeutic in that way. So I think that was where that storyline came from. It was that as a mum, I wanted to show my son an example of a wonderful, strong man dealing with something really difficult.
When you finished Start at the End, did you know how it ended from the beginning? Or did you have to find the ending the same way the characters did?
Yes, the latter. I don't plot the novels, so I just sit down and start writing and see what happens. I feel the same way writing as I do reading, as if I am just discovering this story and these characters as I go, which of course can be quite a challenging way to write. And I'm sure my editors wish I would do a little bit more plotting in advance and make it a bit easier on myself. But I just see what happens, and that often will then involve a lot of editing and a lot of rewriting through several different drafts before we get to the finished product. But it's such an exciting way to experience a story for me. There does come a moment where I can finally see where it's going to end, and then it feels like a downhill run towards that, and I love that moment. And it's always a bit anxiety producing getting to that moment, because you're not sure where it's going to go and if it is going to, fall into place. Somehow it seems to. I think a lot of us we've grown up reading and watching TV and movies, and we have this innate storytelling structure in our heads somewhere. And if we trust in that, then I think that's where the story can reveal itself.
The what if question sits at the heart of the new book. Is there a what if in your own life that you still run sometimes?
Yeah, I often do. I often think, what if Jeff hadn't died? Where would we all be? And what sort of a person would I be? Because I'm sure that grief and any other difficult life challenge changes us. And I feel as if I'm more more fragile in some ways, but also much stronger than I would have ever been. It has carved a path through my life that felt so treacherous. But at the same time, I have met so many incredible people who have become central to my life, and I've made so many friends because of what I've been through. And I've had the most wonderful experiences because of these books, which I would never have written had Jeff not died. I wouldn't be writing about grief because I wouldn't understand it. And I feel like the opportunities that I've had, I'll just always be grateful for the travel, to meet readers in different countries, and to meet you and the people I've met online because of this. It's it's such a mixed bag of joy and hope and deep sadness that I'll never get over in a lot of other ways. So I'm I feel like a different person because of it, and I can only be grateful for some of that side of it, but certainly not for if I could go back in time and reverse things and change it, I would have Jeff back and none of this. I would much rather be with him, and I think we can all think of people that we've lost and thought and think that way. At the end of the day, we're still here and have to find a path through and find a way to thrive after loss.
You self-published Unrequited in 2014. What did rejection feel like before you had the language to talk about it the way you do now?
Mm. I was terrible at being rejected. It would physically hurt every time I had a rejection. And I thought, I'm just not cut out for this career, because any writer will tell you there's just countless rejections, and that continues on no matter how many books you have. And it's not just rejections, it's also criticism and reviews. And, it's terrifying really to be a writer in a lot of ways. Um, and what I've learned over the years is that it's just part of the job. In fact, I'm just out of a call that I had earlier this morning with another writer who just wanted some advice on how to tolerate the constant rejections. And it made me realize just how far I've come in being able to contend with it. And I read an article a few years ago by Kim Liao, who is another author, who decided that she was going to chase 100 rejections every year. And so not just she was going to actively seek to be rejected 100 times, because she realized that to get over this terrible feeling of things not working out, she just had to put herself out there and do a lot more. And then that would sort of become a numbers game. And it was more likely that she would either receive enough feedback to improve her work, or just by putting it out there more times, the odds of somebody picking it up would be higher. And so I've adopted that approach, and I've been doing that now for several years. In January, I go to the stationery shop and I get a piece of cardboard and I draw up 100 boxes, and I aim to fill up every box every year with a rejection. And it has really helped me get much better at the whole thing, at letting it just sort of flow over me, realizing it's almost a game now for me to be rejected. And it got to the point where I spoke about it so much that the team from Oprah Daily asked me to write an article on rejection. So now I've sort of become famous for being rejected, which is like not where I was expecting to go. But I'm so glad that I pushed through, because I feel like there are just so many people out there who've got a dream to write a book or whatever it is, in their own field, and they've had a couple of knockbacks, and then they've thought, I can't do this, I'm not good enough, and they put that away in the bottom drawer of their desk, and it's not seeing the light of day. And I'm sure there are multitude of absolutely brilliant pieces of work that we're not seeing because of the rejection part of it, because that seems too hard. And so I'm always encouraging people to push through and keep going and just find a way to get used to it, because it's so much a part of the job.
You have described rejection as something to be survived and used, not hidden. What is the rejection that was hardest to use?
I think there was a book so Unrequited, the teenage novel, after I'd self-published it, I then met my agent, who then said she would start submitting it to publishers. And the first publisher that she submitted it to really loved it, and it almost got over the line with them. The publishers have an acquisition meeting where everyone from marketing and finance and editorial all come together, and they all have to agree that this book is worth publishing. And everyone at that meeting thought that it was, but one person was absent, and they said, we just need to get their sign off the next morning. Well, we were just on cloud nine about this because it seemed like it was going ahead. And of course, the next day, that person came into work and said they didn't want to sign off. So it didn't go ahead with them. And that I think that was my earliest rejection of a book, and it was the most crushing because I'd never experienced it before, and also it had come so close. I then had 17 more rejections of that novel, and then 2 years later, that same publisher came back to us, which is quite unusual, and said, we've had another look at it and we want to publish it and give you a second book deal as well. And I thought, this was a really good lesson in it being timing and personalities and whatever else is going on in an organization, and not necessarily always something wrong with us or our work. Of course, there's always things that we can do to improve our work, and a lot of that happens after a publishing deal. There's a lot of editing that goes on after you've been accepted. But that, I think, was the most crushing and the earliest, and whenever I think of rejection, I go back to that one. But I did also have one last year that really sort of pulled the rug out from under me a little bit. And it was a film producer who I very greatly, I just admire so much, who had a look at Start at the End and then ultimately didn't pick it up. And when I really stand back and look at that, I have to realize that the fact that that person even considered it is a huge win in my career. And I would never have got near that person several years ago. And again, that's just a result of continuing to put yourself out there and withstand the setbacks and the knockbacks in order to hopefully move closer to the dream.
Do you think that mentality of just rejection is something to be survived and used, not hidden? It's like so I hate to do this so corny, but it's so wise. Did you have that your whole life, or is that something that you learned later?
No, I've definitely had to learn that over time because I was just so bad at it at first. I think that it is one of those things where if it's happened a lot of times, you realize you can step back from it a little bit and see it. But also the thing about it not being hidden, I think, is key, because I think there's a lot of times where we assume we're the only ones going through something. And the more people that talk about things like this, the easier it becomes because you feel less alone. And I always appreciate it when other authors speak up about the things that are being rejected and the setbacks that they're having, because I think the more normalizing we make it, the better it is for everyone. But also it took a bit of the power out of it for me to be able to say, I've had another rejection, and I think there was always this fear that people would be looking at you and thinking, well, they're obviously not very good, or whatever they might imagine they're thinking, when in reality, most people are thinking, thank you for saying that, because I've also had rejections, and it just sort of helps the more we talk about it.
Pictures of You goes into coercive control. It is not just a romance. Did you worry that readers who came for the love story would be unprepared for what was underneath it?
Yes, that's such a great question. It is because, and in that book, which does take readers through this coercive, controlling relationship, there's also another relationship beside it, which is really healthy. And so I've sort of delivered on both. I've delivered a beautiful romance in that story beside a very toxic relationship. And I wrote that book with the advice of my daughter. You're going to love this as a father and son. My daughter, who's now 27, and she's just got her doctorate in criminology. So she was brilliant for helping to advise me on that coercive control storyline. And that book has been optioned for a TV series in Australia, and the producers are now involving my daughter as well as me in the planning process in the writer's room, which is just such a thrill. It's so lovely to be able to do something together. And this is not the daughter that loved Harry Styles, although she also did. It's the other daughter. But it really has been. I think it's just such an important topic, and to be able to write about it in fiction, I've had so many readers get in touch and say, that's my relationship you've captured on the page, or that's my parents' relationship over the last 50 years, or this is my friend is in this situation and this has helped me know how to talk to them and what to do. So I've been really grateful for that kind of response, even though it's it can be very triggering for people to read. And we're now hoping that through a television series, we'll be able to do the same thing. And we're talking about things like putting a podcast beside it and, interviewing survivors and experts and just trying to make a difference in that area for people through the arts. And I think we often do. I think it's often through books and films and TV that we can have conversations about difficult things.
The Last Love Note sold over 100,000 copies in the United States. You are based in Australia. Did that number ever land as real, or did it feel like it was happening to someone else?
Yeah, definitely felt like happening to someone else. In fact, the only time that I've ever been able to really get my head around that was when I went to a concert with my kids in a big stadium. And, and sometimes in a concert, they'll get everyone to turn on their phone torches and everyone's waving their phones. And then they announced how many people had turned up at the venue, and it was about the same number of books that I'd sold. And I just sat there and I could visually see that number. And I just couldn't believe, I still can't believe it. It just feels, it does feel like it's happened to somebody else. It's very hard to just believe, because, this is a long career. I've been writing since I was 14 years old and, juggling it around other jobs and hoping to be published and having all these rejections. So to sit there in that concert and see that many flashlights on in the stadium was this really quite humbling, incredible moment.
Was it not overnight, but did it happen kind of fast, or was it slow? Was it a slow kind of pace?
Well, I mean, it was certainly decades of that not happening before it did happen.
Sure.
So it's been decades coming. But then once the Last Love Note was published in the US, two things really helped this development. One was the Book of the Month Club picked it for one of their books, which meant that I was now suddenly introduced to a whole lot of their readers who otherwise would not have heard of me. And in the same month, Target picked it as their book of the month. So, and that was December, which was a high, a retail month. And so those two things, I think, were what really helped to propel a new unknown Australian author into the US market. And I'm so grateful that Target and Book of the Month both took the risk on me.
After decades of work and then sudden recognition, you are an accountability coach, a photographer, a speaker, and a novelist. Which one do you actually think you are when nobody is asking?
It's got to be the novelist, because I just have felt that way my whole life. Even before I really started trying to write my first novel when I was 14, I just was constantly carrying stories around in my head, and I thought everyone did. I was always off in a dream world with an imaginary cast of characters that I felt like I was walking around with even as a child. So it's definitely just who I am and a big part of who I am. But I think the photography as well is a hobby that I absolutely adore. And it came to me only during the pandemic. I started only on my phone photography, and then I graduated to a big camera. And that is a hobby that I find I can completely escape into and forget everything else. And I think it's just a gift to me. And it's an example of something that has a part of me that's developed since Jeff died. If he was to walk in now and see photos on the wall that I've taken, he would ask who took those photos and be amazed it was me, because he didn't know me as a photographer. And so I'm always looking for, I think there are hobbies and interests and people in our lives and places that we haven't yet explored. And I love that. And I think that that's a big part of the book Start at the End, and even in the title there, that we all face moments that feel like the end, and we can start again at each of those moments. And there's so much ahead of us that will be a joy in our lives that we cannot even anticipate at this point. So finding photography has been a really beautiful thing in my life.
Your mom had dementia, and you have written about that publicly. How do you decide what is yours to share and what belongs to her?
So when I wrote The Last Love Note, which was a novel about a midlife widow processing the loss of her husband and then later on falling in love again, I didn't want to write our exact story. My husband actually died from a heart attack, and I didn't want to write about that. I felt like that was too close. But at the same time, I did want to write about something I knew about intimately. And my mum, by that stage, was suffering from advanced dementia. So I was able to honour really my parents' relationship in that story. And I think it's a matter of how you present it, how you let it. And a lot of it is based in reality, but a lot of it is fictional as well. And I'm very conscious of, whenever I do include things that have happened in real life in novels, very conscious of my family who are quite private, and I'm much more of an oversharer than they are. And so I'm always thinking, is this something that is too close? And then I'll take it out. But at the same time, I think it was a really beautiful way to honour the love between my parents. My dad is now 94, and we lost Mum a couple of years ago, well, nearly 3 years ago now, and she just would have been so proud of all of this, but she didn't know. She was, unable to process this part of my career that she'd been seeing for decades building up. But I think she'd be very proud of it now.
A lot of your work is about women carrying more than they are letting on, quietly and often with humor. When did you first learn to do that yourself?
Oh, I think it's just one of those things of, if you don't laugh, you'll cry, although I usually do both. I think that I'm always observing. I think a lot of writers are very closely observe what's going on in life. And I do have a bit of a sense of the ridiculous that I think I got from my mum. And she would always be taking note of funny little things that people said or did, and making a good story out of it. And so I feel like it's her voice coming through really in my writing, where you can closely next to each other have very deep and raw, difficult emotions, along with the observation of the funny things that happen in life. And I was very conscious when I was writing that I didn't want to keep readers down while they're writing. I did want to lift them out of some of those really difficult emotions with the lightness and humour. And I think that that reflects what life is like. There's a lot of light and shade. And I think that for me, when I'm reading books, the best books have a mix of both.
I have found a lot of stability in my own life through faith in Jesus, and I'm always interested in how others think about it. Do you have a faith, a practice, or something you turn to when things stop making sense? And has that changed since Jeff died?
Hmm. I'm not practicing in a religious sense, but I would say I have a lot of spirituality in my belief system. And really, for me, what I have found most joyful and hopeful has been the connection and support that I've had from other people. I have found humans to be the most compassionate and extraordinary people since I went through this. And there are people who have stepped up in my life that I would never have expected to step up in the way that they have. And I have noticed now, for, a few years through this, that you can always tell when somebody has been through something difficult, and they bring to your interaction this vulnerability that I think makes for a much better relationship and connection. And so I think for me, it is that, and it is also being able to do things like go out and chase the aurora in the dark and look up at the stars and just realize that there's a much bigger world than the day-to-day world that we're facing in our own lives. That kind of perspective has really helped me.
You have said photography and aurora chasing are not hobbies. They are central to who you are. What do you see through the lens that you cannot get to through words?
Yeah, that's good too. You asked some great questions. In addition to the astrophotography, I also love macro photography, where you've got a lens that brings you up really, really close to the miniature details in things like it. I will spend, it's nothing for me to spend 2 hours in the middle of winter, freezing cold, sitting on the ground, taking close-up photos of the frost on a blade of grass or the dewdrops on a petal, in a flower, and I become incredibly lost in it. I just forget everything else that's going on in life. And sometimes in that dewdrop, I will see the reflection of the sky and the reflection of the lake beside it, or whatever it is. And I think that by finding something that takes you completely out of your brain and your thoughts and your worries, I think we all need that. And for me, it's photography. Some people find that in gardening or in music or in books and movies and cooking. It could be anything. It doesn't matter. I think just if we can all find one thing that helps us to forget the harder parts of our lives, even for a moment, then it's really worthwhile pursuing.
And if somebody, is listening to this and they're saying, "Hey, that sounds great, but I have no idea what that is for me." You seem to
Mhm.
have like 5 different things. What would you suggest people do to kind of find that?
I think it's about having a go. There's a whole lot of things I've tried to do that it turns out I can't do and I'm really hopeless at, like a whole lot of artistic ideas. I tried watercolor painting, I tried drawing, I went to classes, I did online, YouTube tutorials on various different artistic things, and I tried all of those before I landed on photography. And so I think part of it is that it can be quite difficult for us as adults to be beginners in anything, and we get frustrated with our lack of ability. And so it's about getting over that fear of not being any good at something, and just to go in with this mindset of I'll just give it a go and see what happens. Because I remember when I couldn't even work out how to focus my camera, and it was really frustrating, and I was reading up on it and doing a whole lot of tutorials, and it took me, I think, weeks before I could really figure out the settings and how to operate it, and I felt like giving up. And now it's something I can do without thinking. And so it's that allowing yourself to be hopeless at first, and just to go into it thinking we don't have to all be great at every single thing we do. A lot of it is just, am I enjoying this? And if you are, then that's great. Keep doing it.
Before we close, I always ask our guests to brag about their family for a minute. Emma, please go ahead.
Oh my gosh, only a minute. I am so lucky to have the family that I have. I've got my 3 gorgeous kids, Hannah, who's 27 and doing amazing things in her criminology degree, Sophie, who's 25, who's a wonderful hairdresser, and who has just recently got engaged to be married. So we're in the midst of planning her wedding, which is so much fun. And then Sebastian, who's 15 and a really talented musician and loves online gaming and has some amazing friends through that, and who I'm just so proud of because of his resilience over the last 10 years. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to brag about the family. That's wonderful. I love it.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
The births of my 3 children.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
Losing my husband.
What are you most excited about?
I want to learn how to do screenwriting.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Persevere.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
I must say, Start at the End by Emma Gray.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
I just want to say this has been a complete delight speaking with you. It has been such a thought-provoking and beautiful discussion. I just really appreciate the care that you've taken in preparing these questions, because this is one of the best interviews I think I can remember ever having.
That's awesome. Thank you. This is the real last question. You almost made it out. The real last question. At the end of all of our episodes, I ask people, now that you got to know us a little bit and see kind of the format of the podcast, who are some people that you know personally that you think we should try to have on as future guests?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I mean, most of the people I know are Australian authors who are breaking into the US. So one of the new authors, she's had 2 books out there now, is Anna Johnston, and she writes stories about much older characters who are, in their 80s. And I think she has I think you'd have a really beautiful conversation with her.
Emma, thank you for joining us today. You have taken the hardest things, grief, the loss, the question of what comes next, and turned them into stories that help people feel less alone in their own. Whether someone picks up your books because they are going through something, or simply because they love a good love story, they are getting something honest underneath. We appreciate your time and your willingness to go to the real places in this conversation. May God bless you and your family.
Thank you so much. And what a delight it's been speaking with you. I appreciate your time as well.
Thank you. Yeah, this is awesome.